Hi there, I'm Steve Nygren, founder of Serenbe. You know, for a lot of Americans, life just isn't working the way it should. We're more stressed, anxious, and disconnected than ever. Many people feel left behind by the economy, let down by institutions they once trusted, and overwhelmed by the scale of environmental challenges. Much of this comes down to something simple: where and how we live. When we reinvest in our communities and rethink the way we build and connect with one another, we open the door to healthier, more meaningful lives, not just for ourselves, but for the future generations. That's what my book, Start in Your Own Backyard, Transforming Where You Live with Radical Common Sense, is about. It offers a practical, hopeful roadmap for creating places where people of all ages can thrive, where everyday life is infused with beauty, purpose, and connection. The book is here to spark ideas, offer guidance, and remind you that big change really can start small. Start in Your Own Backyard is available now wherever you buy books. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply begin right where we are.
A native New Yorker with a lifelong love of jazz, Gary Cassis didn't take a straight path to Serenbe. Before moving here, his career in banking and global finance took him all over the world, and his deep passion for music and the arts were always there, quietly running alongside it all. Now, in semi-retirement, he's come full circle, returning to those roots in a really meaningful way by helping shape Serenbe's cultural landscape through his work with the art farm. In today's episode, Garnie and I sit down with Gary to talk about how instead of retreating, he's turning this chapter into something totally new. He serves on the art farm board, chairs the music council, and even launched the art farm's own podcast to capture and share the stories of visiting artists. Through it all, Gary is helping make sure world-class art isn't something you have to travel for. It's something you can simply stumble upon on a Sunday afternoon here in Chat Hills. This is a conversation about rediscovery, creative purpose, and what it looks like to stay deeply engaged with your passions, your community, and the world around you.
I mean, this is a community. This is why we're here. That's why at this stage in my life, retirement, in quotes, isn't really retirement. I'm more busy now than I've ever been. And for those out there listening, Serenbe is that kind of a place where you can stay quiet, you can stay in your own little bubble, or you can get out and get around. And that's what I do. There's never a dull moment unless I want it to be a dull moment. And I generally don't like things to be dull.
Gary, it is so exciting to have you on the podcast. How are you today?
I am doing well. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Hey, Garnie, how are you?
I'm great. So happy to be here.
So, Gary, you're very familiar with the podcast, and we always kick it off by hearing what your Serenbe story is. How did you discover the community, and what ultimately led you to your move?
Yeah, I guess everyone has that story, and everyone asks that story. And so I was thinking about how I discovered it. And it was actually through a friend of the family who was playing in the Daisy back in the day. They used to have like a string quartet, and every Sunday they would play. And so she played viola. And so that was my first introduction to Serenbe. That was Selborne at the time. So it was very new. And from there, we would come down on Sundays to the brunch because there was a very good chef in the kitchen, and she would have this fried chicken brunch that would occur. And so my family, my wife, my mother, we would always come down, or often we would come down and enjoy Sunday brunch down at the farmhouse.
I love it. Well, and that's interesting because your professional life before your retirement was in finance, but you've always been involved in connected to the arts, especially music and jazz. So tell us a little bit about your background and sort of where that music love came from.
Yeah. So if you can hear, I'm a native New Yorker. So you might hear some of that come through. But as such, music was always in the house. I can remember as a kid growing up, mom and dad always played music, and they were primarily into jazz. And so we kind of got our ear tuned to that early. But obviously, as a kid growing up, get exposed to all kinds of things as well. So it was obviously Motown, the sound of Philadelphia. And then as I got older, my palette for music had expanded. So I was listening to all kinds of things. And I'm a product of the Woodstock generation. So I got into the whole, Woodstock thing. And so music was always there. But being in New York, you're really surrounded by, if you take advantage of it, the sort of center of the universe when it comes to art. So it wasn't just music. We were exposed to dance, such as Alvin Ailey, Dance Theater of Harlem, Negro Ensemble Company. We would go see things like Pippin and Hair. And so our parents were really, motivated us and took us to those shows. And so we became early adopters, if you will, of music and of art in general. When I went to school, I became involved in radio as a young teenager, if you will, just getting into university. There's a radio station that really appealed to me more so than taking statistics, but nevertheless. uh, then you had to get a radio license, right? So you study, take a test, and you'd have to engineer it, and then you would have shows, and my show was, as you might imagine, was jazz, and so it gave me an opportunity again to learn a little bit more about media, how it all worked. It gave me an opportunity to interview people like Herbie Hancock and Roberta Flack because they would come
Wow.
to our school, and I would get that interview, and so that was like a part of it. When I graduated, it became very apparent to me that I need to make money. So I joined the bank.
That
And
funny thing.
yeah, you getting in radio was like really tough, and it was important to me that, okay, we need to pay these loans off. And so at the time they had really great management training programs. And so I was a part of a management training program at a bank that's no longer here because they went through that whole consolidation thing, but it was Manufacturers Hanover Trust Bank, which then later became JP Morgan, and the beat goes on. So that got me into a whole different world, using a different side of my brain, and unfortunately got me out of sort of the music world, but nevertheless went to the jazz clubs and did all of that. So the banking part, though, so it was a training program, so you got a chance to see a little bit of everything. So it started off in finance and credit, but I really, really liked the whole sort of operational side of it, which I'm glad I stayed into because that operational side of it became more digitized over time. And so I got a chance to see that transformation of how banking went from really this sort of analog processing of information to this whole other side, which was really digital. And our commodity really became not so much the money, but it became the information. And the
Hmm.
information became what we were really selling. So that kind of closed that loop out. So
Right. No, that's really interesting. And I think, Garnie, probably you relate to this. Your parents were very involved in the arts, and my parents were really great at taking us to shows, whether it was something as, easy as Annie when we were kids, and then maybe it became Phantom, but growing up in Los Angeles. And I do think that that really matters to sort of expose kids at a young age, if possible, to arts. But Garnie, I'm sure you had incredible opportunities growing up like that, being in the center of Atlanta when you guys were living in town.
Yeah, exposure is everything, whether from where you're living, the school that you're attending. And I think I think we can all say that we're living lives now and see certainly friends and peers where people don't have as much exposure or opportunity, whether that be in school and programs that are cut back or where we're living, right? And so I think one of the beautiful things that we always talk about what we're doing both at Serenbe and then through the art farm at Serenbe is surrounding people with beauty and art every day. So it's in your exposure points and then creating those easy points so that you're not having to block an entire night or an entire weekend, that you can stumble upon things that it's easy to do. And Gary, you're so much a part of that, of bringing art and exposure points that are world class that you would certainly travel to, but we get to just like stumble down a sidewalk and walk into Guinea Hall to hear a performer.
Yeah. So, Gary, tell us a little bit about that. Garnie touched on the Art Farm, which is our arts, culture, environmental group here that's a nonprofit. You serve on that board, you chair the Music Council, and you also host, getting back to sort of your radio roots, the Art Farm podcast. How did you get involved? Was this something that Garnie pulled you into, or one of the other chairs, or?
Yeah, it was actually Janice.
Mm-hmm. Janice Barton. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Janice Barton. And she said, hey, we'd like to get into a little bit of jazz out here. What do you think? I said, oh my God, me and jazz. I mean, so I had been involved locally down here with jazz only to the extent that I was a part of the Atlanta Jazz Society. So the Atlanta Jazz Society puts on, as you probably well know, the largest free jazz festival in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And so working with them, being a part of that organization helped me formulate some ideas around what would I do if I had a similar situation. And so with Janice introducing me to what the board said they wanted to do in terms of introducing jazz, and then working through that helped me formulate programming. And one of the pieces of that, I said, I'd love to, but I want to make sure that we're also have that component that introduces children to the program, because like we've all said, that's when you make your mark. That's when that mark is made on a child. And if you do it in the right way, it'll stay with them and it becomes a part of their life, which is, I think, a good thing, particularly now. And so with the help of the Art Farm, we've been able to reach out to 6 schools now, local schools here in the, not just Terra, but the schools here in Chat Hills, as well as schools in Atlanta. And our reach at this point, believe it or not, is about 6,000, 4,000 to 6,000. And what I mean by that is that those schools have, 500 here, 600 there. So we have the potential to reach them through programming here at the Art Farm. And so we're still working through that. How do we deliver upon that and have that impact? So it's twofold, right? It's the community here in Serenbe, the adults, teenagers, as well as the local surrounding area, and then to broaden it in a way in which is manageable.
Mm-hmm. Well, and when you really started that, I want to say, was it 2 years ago when the jazz programming first kicked in, it was just an immediate sellout. Like you almost can't get tickets to those shows.
Right.
And you started bundling them. I mean, it's been such a success. And so tell us a little bit about what's coming up this fall.
There's a lot going on. So the good thing is that we have a really good group of people here in Serenbe, right? I mean, we've got folks here who are automatically sort of tuned in to good music, to good art, to good theater. So it's just really a matter of finding the artists that we can afford, right? Because we're a 501(c), so it's not like we've got, unlimited funds. And a lot of these artists, they don't, you can't get them unless you're ready to step up and pay $10,000, $15,000, $30,000 at least. But therein lies a challenge that you have to work really hard at finding some of the newer upcoming artists that, in time we won't be able to afford. So that was my challenge. And so that, coupled with the fact that we have, a demographic here, both young, medium, and old, we just need to find that lane that will attract them. And so, and there's a lot of talent here in Atlanta. So that made it a little bit easier. So the first year or so was to work locally, satisfying the community. And then as we begin to grow, then step up the quality of the artist. And so this season, we've got some great programming, notwithstanding the fact that we've put in place classical music. So one of the ideas that Garnie had, and it's really taken off, has been the classical music component. So we offer classical music every Sunday afternoon from roughly 7 to 8 p.m. For 1 hour. And it's absolutely divine because it's being staged in our beautiful Motto Amphitheater. So you have the green there, you've got the water behind it, the pond, and then you've got the beautiful sculpture, and it's just perfect. So we have that going on. And then the jazz, we
And
have,
that starts, Gary, in case anybody wants to come, because I think it's is it 6 or 7 Sundays this summer, the summer season?
yeah, so it's 6 Sundays, starting in fact, it's every Sunday in August. So easy to remember. 6 Sundays well, there's five, but okay, there'll be every Sunday, there'll be a performance. We actually kicked off the classical music component, if you recall, by bringing in two well-known artists, David and Julie Coucheron. And for those who follow classical music, David is a concert master. He's a concert master at the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra. His sister plays piano. By the way, that podcast is also available on the Art Form podcast if you want to know more about their backgrounds. But yes, that's going on. We also kicked off the season with what we call omnimodal, which was, again, something that people sometimes refer to it as experimental music, but it is not really experimental. We got some really good musicians and artists and computer scientists from Georgia Tech University that came out, put together a program based on sound, based upon AI, and the human experience, along with the visual content to that.
And that sold out too, right? That was a
Sold
sellout.
out too.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a bit of a hard sell because it's hard to sometimes articulate what that is, and sometimes, and I kind of put my foot in my mouth and said, well, it sounds a little bit like this and it sounds a little bit like that. And there were some folks on the board saying, well, we don't like that. We don't like that. So it was hard. So you have to.
But your passion was able to get the board on,
Get it sold,
on board.
Yeah.
And it happened, and it was a sellout. So it was a great example of trying something a little different. And so we've got the jazz series, some experimental, this fabulous free summer Sunday, in the park, basically.
So the jazz series is a little bit different this year. So what we want to do is, again, I think that the other thing that Serenbe allows us to do, the art form in particular, and it's one of our sort of pillars, is to educate, uplift, and maintain that high degree of artistic integrity. So we're doing more storytelling in our musical presentations around jazz. So the first particular performance, which will be in September, will focus on the development of jazz, the history of jazz. And so we're doing some storytelling there, featuring a quintet that will start from explaining jazz from its early roots, slave songs, narratives, gospel music, to blues, to swing, up through bebop, post-bebop, and some of the more contemporary styles. The second performance will be Latin Cuban, Afro-Latin Cuban. Folks said, hey, we need some Latin music out here. And the other thing here, folks love to dance in Serenbe. Garnie will tell you that. She's like, I want more dancing. I want more dancing. So we've got something that we think, and it'll be presented actually in the pavilion. So we'll have space, we'll have room. I'm working with an artist. His name is Bobby Sanabria. He is a Grammy-nominated artist from the South Bronx, very well known in the industry, comes with a teaching background, comes with the full package in terms of orchestration, in terms of musical appreciation. So he's coming in with a sextet. There'll be 6 musicians there. And then we finish off with Jason Marcellus and his quintet. Wow. Jason Marcellus is part of the infamous Marcellus family out of New Orleans, and he will present a taste of New Orleans and also bringing in a more contemporary style of music. So
incredible.
The summer series, I think, very important before we move to the next for everybody to hear. We started by saying access and exposure at a young age to music. So the summer series was born out of, and I want to make sure anyone who's listening, takes this and says, oh, I have to go on a Sunday in August. Or how can we bring classical music that's usually not stuffy, but you're usually having to go to classical music in a more contained environment. And you don't necessarily, if you're not a lover of classical music, you won't take that time. And if you're a parent of a child of any age, you certainly are like, oh, I don't know if I can take my child to, sit through 2 hours, right?
Tchaikovsky,
of a performance. And so the classical music series was born out of, well, let's do it outside in the Motto Amphitheater with the pond and have it in a relaxed and inviting environment, so that whether you have a 5-year-old or a 15-year-old or a friend or a spouse who says, I don't like classical music at all, it's just such a beautiful way to introduce people to the music and to the art form and, you know, under the stars and in the open air. So it's not to
and
be
the
missed in
kids
August.
dance
Yeah,
around and they run
I
around. It's so
yeah,
lovely and
I have a
fun. And
3, 5, and 7-year-old and feel not just comfortable, but excited to take them, right? And they're enchanted. And so it's finding, you know, again, I'll say it's one of the things that I love about what we are able to do at Serenbe through the art farm is creating access and exposure points, not just to fantastic art, but to art that forms of art like classical music that you may not otherwise be able to expose your young children or friends to that don't think that they love classical music.
Mhm.
And the most important thing is that it's free.
It's free. Oh,
Yes,
it's free
It's
too.
which
free,
is lovely.
It's
okay?
free.
Yeah,
And
yeah. And
that's
so
important. That's not the whole story, but that's a really important story that it is
yeah,
accessible
I think
to Garnie's
accessibility,
point.
because it's one more barrier for especially families with young kids is, you know, if you're going to spend a night out and take the kids, if it's free, it's a little bit of a lower barrier. Like, what if they do melt down? What if they, you know, we can
Yep,
leave. We didn't, it's
yep.
okay, it's good. Or we can walk away and come back. And so it's a really, yeah, to Garnie's point, it's very magical. Which sort of brings me to there's a lot of young families in Serenbe because everybody cites exactly this the freedom to bring their kids to events, the freedom to let them run around. For you moving here in retirement, how has that been? I always think it's sort of fun, you know, settling here in your stage of life. How has the kids and that sort of multi-generational shaped your experience?
Oh, that just makes it so much better, quite frankly. You know, to be in an environment where you have that kind of interaction with families, with kids. I bring my grandkids down here and just turn them loose, and they would not normally have that where they live in Atlanta, and they live in a very nice neighborhood, but it's just not the same setup. I mean, this is a community. This is why we're here. That's why at this stage in my life, retirement in quotes isn't really retirement. I'm more busy now than I've ever been. And for those out there listening, you know, Serenbe is that kind of a place where you can stay quiet, you can stay in your own little bubble, or you can get out and get around. And that's what I do. There's never a dull moment unless I want it to be a dull moment, and I generally don't like things to be
Right.
dull. So, you know, it's just a lot going on here, and uh, what I left out in terms of my career is that the first 2 years out of college, I taught school for a couple of years. And so again, that affinity now of returning back to, you know, some of my early roots in professional life and working with kids is all part of kind of where I'm at now. And the more I do, the more pleasure I get out of it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because retirement can mean so many different things to different people. And I think, you know, obviously Steve Nygren is a whole different ball of wax. Like that man is just a machine at 80. And, you know, I don't even know what we call that. It's beyond third. But, you know, with Serenbe, I think, you know, has really enabled you to approach this chapter, right, as active
Right.
retirement or whatever we want to call it. And so, you know, besides the art farm, which includes the podcast, which I'd love to touch on in a minute, you know, what other things are you doing with friends here? And what does it look like for
Oh
you
gosh.
personally?
Oh gosh, you know, I'm not going to start rattling off all the things that go on here outside of the art farm. But you know, there is a men's group, all right, formerly known as the Romeos, retired old men who eat out. But there were some who took offense to that and renamed it the Circle of Knowledge. And
Ah,
so we meet we meet every Friday at one of the homes of the members. In fact, they're out today on a field trip to compost. I said, guys, I'm going to put that one off today. I don't think I'm going to do the compost tour today. It was down in Alabama, an hour and a half from here. But no, that's a very active group of men who it's just incredible the amount of knowledge and information and laughs that we old guys have. You know, we're at a stage in our life where we don't really have to go out on a limb and talk about what we've accomplished because we're beyond that. So we're talking about
mm-hmm.
life experiences, and it's really, really interesting to sit next to or across from guys who have similar interests and talk openly about things, and that's uplifting for me, to be in that state. To very few places, and I've traveled all over the world, right? So I lived in Europe for 10 years, 5 years in Paris and 5 years in London, and traveled through extensively throughout northern Africa and southern Africa. And again, born in the city of New York. And so at this stage, to find a place like this is absolutely incredible. There are very few places like that. So when you ask that question, about what else are you doing? I mean, there's all these life experiences that not just me, but the guy sitting next to me or the gals across the table have these incredible experiences. And so actively listening to what people are up to is also important to me, which kind of gets me into the whole podcast thing, right?
Yeah. So to tell us a little bit about that, you were the driving force to sort of make that happen. Tell me, did you bring the idea to the board, and tell us what it's like been building that so far?
Well, I brought it to Garnie. I trapped Garnie at the farmer's market. And I say, Garnie, wouldn't it be cool if, when the visiting artists come down, that we record them, because then we could have an archive, we can promote, we can do this. And he says, yeah, just go do it. She says, yeah, that's a good idea. Garnie, now what?
He's like, let's do it. But it was one of those aha moments, right, Gary, where we were like, we have all of these fantastic people coming and all of these artists. And not that we need to be able to tell the world who's coming, but if someone's curious, we're not sharing the artist stories and experiences and just the breadth of talent that we have in the neighborhood, on a weekly basis on the sidewalks. And so it was such a good idea. It was kind of, again, it was one of those light bulbs of oh yeah, this is so easy. And then we can figure out what to do with it later, right? Even if we don't know what we're going to do with it, at least we'll have it.
But yeah, create that archive, because these people are all alumni, and it's so exciting, the breadth of talent in artists.
The breadth of talent, and we've got a great marketing team over there at the art farm. And so it was, again, one of those, moments where we can take an interview from a world-class artist and personalize it with their experiences here in Serenbe. We'd like to get an artist who maybe has spent a day or two getting around, getting a feel for Serenbe, and then have them relate, what they do in art to this place that we call home. And when you do that, it personalizes it, not just for those who live here, but for those that are listening outside, and it wants them to come check this place out, right? That you've got, singers, you've got actors, you've got filmmakers, or people who put on these things, these plays, and they've experienced that. I mean, right now I'm getting emails coming in from artists saying, hey, can we perform here in Serenbe? And before, it wasn't quite that way. I'd have to send out packages as to who is Serenbe, what do we do, what is the art farm? Now we're becoming recognized. And
you've created a calling card.
Exactly, which is something that we hadn't done before. So we're pleased about that.
Yeah, no, we're super excited. Well, Gary, one of the things that we always ask at the close is, if you had a friend visiting Serenbe or somebody new who'd never been here, what was the one experience, I know it's hard, that you would tell them that they absolutely can't miss?
Yes, I actually thought about that, and you're right. There's just so many. But what you cannot miss here are the trails. You've got to do the trails. Okay, it's so easy to come rolling up in here, right, in your car, and get in a cart, and you're up and down the different lanes. But the beauty of Serenbe, the vibe in Serenbe, to really come away with something that's memorable, are the trails. We've got miles and miles of trails. We've got maps. We've got the waterfall. I'm over in Grange. So, this morning, my wife and I, we took a stroll around Grange Lake. But one of the places that I really like, and it's a secret, right? So if I tell you, and people are listening, it's no longer a secret. But because it's you, I'll let
They're
you
going to have to
know.
come find you, Gary.
Yeah. Well,
Okay, you're going to let
I
me
had
know? Okay.
that same deal with mushrooms, right? So the people here that do mushroom collecting and the edibles here, the mushrooms, say, well, we can't tell you where we go, forage
Yeah,
for our
right.
mushrooms
Nobody
because
wants to
once
tell the
the word is
secret.
out, then it's no longer. But I will tell you, my favorite place is the Labyrinth. Right, the Labyrinth is a
Yeah.
really nice
Mm-hmm.
place where you can go and meditate and be among the tall pine trees. As you know,
Mm-hmm.
it's off the Wildflower Meadow. There is sculpture back up in there, and so that's
Mm-hmm.
my favorite place. And so if I were to recommend a place, um, that's special, that it's not to be missed, it would be, that location right up in there, and that's all I'm gonna say about it. I'm not
Yeah.
gonna tell
Yeah.
you how to get there. You have to go get your map and find
No,
it.
well, and I'll add in that is one of the many benefits of staying at the inn, that is one of the amenities at the inn, that you can walk the labyrinth, or if you are a resident, you have access to it. So otherwise we don't really promote it publicly. So, those are the two
Yeah.
ways. You got to buy a house or stay at the inn are the best ways to visit it. But it really is beautiful. And we do have an incredible, we'll have to do a whole nother podcast on it, arts program with public art here, which we've
Yes.
touched on in the past, which is wonderful as well.
Yes.
Well, Gary, thank you so much for your time. And we'll put the Art Farm podcast in the show notes and promote that, as well as the events calendar. And we appreciate everything you're doing for Serenbe and for the Art Farm and just being a lovely new neighbor.
Thank you so much, Monica. Thank you so much, Garnie.
Thanks, Gary.
All right.
Bye.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Inn at Serenbe is a luxury retreat tucked away in the rolling countryside just outside Atlanta and just minutes from Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. With over 1,000 acres to explore, you'll find preserved forests, a wildflower meadow, and over 15 miles of scenic hiking trails. Whether you're exploring the animal village, lounging by the pool, or enjoying a fresh farm-to-table meal, there's no shortage of ways to unwind at the Inn at Serenbe. Use code Serenbe Stories when you book online or over the phone and receive 10% off your next stay. The Inn at Serenbe offers endless ways to connect with nature and create unforgettable memories, so book today.